Imagine opening an ancient religious text. You're expecting the usual cadence.
Right, the standard stuff.
Yeah, exactly. You expect to read about burning bushes, parted seas, maybe some moral philosophy.
Or, just a bit of ancient poetry about the stars.
Exactly. And instead, you turn the page and you just find yourself staring at a deeply detailed breakdown of a 40-foot marine reptile.
A reptile with a 6-foot stinger, no less.
Yes, a 6-foot stinger, followed immediately by this intense multi-paragraph analysis of the orbital mechanics of an electron.
It completely shatters the mental framework most of us use when we approach these kinds of subjects.
Oh, holy.
Because for the vast majority of people, you have the theological narrative sitting on one side of the room, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the empirical scientific textbook sitting all the way on the other.
And never the twain shall meet.
Exactly. They are entirely separate disciplines.
But today, we are diving into a worldview where those two sides of the room don't just meet. They literally collide.
They intertwine.
Yeah, they attempt to build this completely unified theory of everything. So welcome to this deep dive.
We really have a massive mission ahead of us today.
We really do. We are looking at a specific set of source materials. So these are excerpts from part 3 of a book called The Law of God.
Written by Father Seraphim Slobodskoy.
Right. And I want to be super clear right off the bat here. We are not just doing a standard Sunday school reading of the book of Genesis.
No, not at all.
We are exploring the just incredibly intricate way this specific author attempts to seamlessly fuse Orthodox theology with 20th century scientific discoveries.
He's trying to build a bridge.
Yeah, a bridge between ancient Hebrew scripture and, modern paleontology, quantum physics, genetics.
It's ambitious, but before we take another step, let's lay down the foundational ground rules for this deep dive.
Good call.
Because you, the listener, you need to know exactly how we're approaching this today. Our goal is to impartially map out the architecture of the author's arguments.
Right. Impartial is the key word.
We are acting entirely as neutral guides to this source text. So we're not here to endorse or promote the theological claims being made.
Nope.
Nor are we here to validate the specific scientific conclusions the author draws.
Our job is just to dissect the fascinating mechanics of how he synthesizes these two historically antagonistic fields.
Exactly. Whether you find his conclusions profound or, highly debatable, the sheer ambition of his argument is just worth taking apart piece by piece.
I couldn't agree more. We are basically putting on our hard hats and inspecting the blueprints.
I like that analogy.
And to understand those blueprints, we first have to understand how the author organizes the entire timeline of the universe.
The macro timeline.
Yeah. He sets up the overarching narrative of human history as this grand cosmic contract, and it's divided into two massive eras.
The Old Testament and the New Testament.
Right. And in his framework, the Old Testament isn't just a collection of historical books. It's a very specific period defined by preparation.
Right. It stretches all the way from the creation of the world up until the coming of the Savior.
Because the narrative premise is that humanity has experienced this catastrophic fall, right? They've lost their direct connection to the divine.
So the Old Testament basically serves as the covenant, the binding agreement.
Yeah.
It's where God meticulously prepares humanity step by step to receive a promised Savior who can fix that broken connection.
Which, of course, leads directly into his definition of the New Testament. He frames that as the ultimate fulfillment of that ancient promise.
Right. The text states that Jesus Christ enters the physical world to vanquish sin and death, establishing a new covenant that allows humanity to receive eternal life.
So that is the massive macro-level timeline. But for our deep dive today, we're hitting rewind.
All the way back.
Yeah, we are going past the New Testament, past the Old Testament prophets, past the Garden of Eden, to the absolute very beginning.
We are systematically walking through his detailed interpretations of what he calls the invisible world and the 6 days of creation.
And I think the most surprising thing about his creation narrative is that it does not begin with the Big Bang.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't begin with matter or light or even empty space. It starts with something entirely imperceptible to human senses.
Before there was gravity, before there was a single atom vibrating in the void, there was the invisible world.
Right. And the text lays down this beautiful and frankly necessary philosophical premise right at the start.
It defines the fundamental nature of God simply as love.
Yeah, and it pulls from the biblical verse 1 John 4:8, to establish this.
And the logical leap the author makes here is just fascinating.
How so?
Well, he argues that because living in a state of love is the highest possible blessing, like the ultimate joy God desired for other beings to exist so they could share in that exact same joy.
Oh, wow. So it provides the vital motive for creation.
Exactly.
Because if you look at a lot of ancient creation myths, humanity or the world is often created out of conflict, right? Or by accident.
Or to serve as literal slaves to the gods.
Right. But here, the author is arguing that the universe is not a random collision of particles or some cold utilitarian experiment.
It's an overflow.
An overflow. I like that.
Yeah, it's the deliberate sharing of an already complete joy. So, before God bothered with dirt or water or stars, he created a realm of purely spiritual beings to participate in that love.
And the text describes these beings, the angels, as bodiless and immortal spirits.
And God created an unimaginable multitude of them.
Right. But he didn't just make them as static, floating clouds of energy. He endowed them with 3 very specific traits.
Intellect, will, and strength.
Which means they possess consciousness.
Right. And they are highly organized.
Yeah, the author pulls from a very specific historical text here, a book by St. Dionysius the Areopagite called The Heavenly Hierarchy.
Right, which categorizes the angelic world into distinct orders based on their proximity to the divine and, the types of cosmic service they provide.
So we're looking at the heavy hitters here, the seraphim, the cherubim, and the archangels.
But the inclusion of will among those traits, that's the linchpin for everything that follows.
Because the text explicitly states that God gave these bodiless spirits free will.
Yeah. And the reasoning provided is deeply psychological, honestly. Forced love is not true love.
Right. If you are programmed to love your creator, you are essentially just a machine running a script.
Exactly. For love to have any actual value, the being offering it must have the genuine capacity to withhold it.
They have to choose it freely.
Right.
Let me make sure I'm mapping this correctly, though.
Mm.
Because this right here is the catalyst for the entire cosmic drama.
Oh, absolutely.
If these beings are created entirely good,
Right,
without any physical bodies to be tempted by physical desires,
yeah.
and they exist in a state of continuous joy,
Oh.
where does the friction come from?
Yeah, it's the big question.
I mean, it feels like building a perfectly tuned, flawless engine that suddenly, inexplicably decides it wants to be the mechanic. Like, what causes a purely spiritual intellect to rebel?
Well, that is one of the oldest and most complex theological puzzles in human history, really.
Yeah.
But the author's framework relies on a very specific definition of evil to answer it.
Okay.
In this worldview, evil is not a created substance, meaning God did not build a dark room and, put it in the corner of the universe. Evil is strictly defined as a rejection of God's will.
Oh, interesting.
It is a deprivation of good. In the exact same way that a shadow is not a physical object, it's merely the absence of light.
Right.
So when you grant a highly intelligent being absolute free will, you are introducing a profound vulnerability into the system.
You're giving them the sheer capacity to look at the source of all life and just say, no.
Exactly. Free will is the terrifying, dangerous, but absolutely necessary prerequisite for genuine love.
So to use the engine analogy, the engine didn't catch a virus or break a piston.
No.
It actively evaluated its own operation and just chose to stop running.
Exactly that. And the text zeroes in on one of the highest, most brilliant, and most powerful angels in this hierarchy, Lucifer.
Right. According to the narrative, Lucifer becomes infatuated with his own perfection.
He looks at his own staggering intellect and power, and instead directing his love outward toward his creator.
He turns it inward. He becomes proud. The text says he desired to be like God, independent and supreme.
And in doing so, he fundamentally alters his own nature. He becomes the opposer.
Which is where we get the word Satan.
Right. The text notes that the word devil translates to slanderer, and Satan means opposer.
And Lucifer doesn't just quietly leave the heavenly hierarchy either.
No, he leads a massive insurrection.
He convinces a huge swath of other angels to follow his philosophy of rebellion, and they become what we know as demons.
Which triggers a literal celestial war in the invisible world.
Archangel Michael steps forward as the defender of the divine order.
And his battle cry during this conflict is fascinating because it literally translates to his own name. He shouts, "Who is equal to God?"
The visual implications of this unseen war are incredibly striking. Michael and the loyal angels battle Satan and his faction, and the rebellious spirits are ultimately defeated.
Right, they are cast out of this higher spiritual plane. They fall into what the text calls Hades, or the nether regions.
But importantly, the author defines this not necessarily as a subterranean cavern of physical fire,
Right.
but as a state of absolute, agonizing separation from God.
And because they made this ultimate choice with their perfect intellects, they are now permanently confirmed in their evil.
They've locked themselves into that state of rejection.
So, with no way back, they dedicate their existence to tempting humanity to join their rebellion.
Meanwhile, the angels who remain faithful through this massive conflict, they're fundamentally changed as well.
Right, they become the holy angels, which means messengers.
The text suggests that having faced the ultimate choice and chosen loyalty, they are now so confirmed in goodness that they are incapable of committing evil.
They become active agents of divine care, which the author notes includes serving as guardian angels assigned to individual humans at the moment of baptism.
You know, we actually have a very specific visual aid provided in our source material that illustrates this exact theological event.
Yes, it's a reproduction of an icon, and it captures the sheer chaos of this moment brilliantly.
I spent a long time looking at this first image. It's titled The Creation of the Angelic World, but it really depicts the immediate aftermath of the rebellion.
Right.
In the center, you have a circular, radiant medallion featuring Christ, holding an open book, representing divine order and truth.
Uh-huh.
And surrounding this center are these overlapping translucent spheres, almost like celestial bubbles.
Yeah, and inside each sphere is an angel.
Right. The ones positioned at the top of the image are incredibly serene. They have
Right.
bright halos, their wings are majestic and structured, and they are looking toward the center.
But as your eyes move down the image,
The spheres start to darken.
yeah,
The figures trapped inside those lower bubbles are losing their halos. Their bodies look chaotic, twisted, and they are visibly tumbling downward, falling out of the organized symmetry of the frame.
it's a haunting, perfectly executed visual of order collapsing into localized chaos.
It really perfectly sets the stakes. The invisible realm has experienced its defining crisis. The lines are drawn.
The concept of rebellion, of a localized deprivation of good, now exists.
And it is only after this massive, unseen drama is resolved that the text claims God turned his attention to a completely new, vastly different medium.
He decides to create a visible material universe.
And this transition from pure bodiless spirit to physical matter is where the author's specific genius or madness, depending on your perspective, really kicks into high gear.
Oh, absolutely. We are moving into the physical genesis of the universe.
We're looking at the initial formation of reality, and the author does not start with a telescope.
No.
He starts with a dictionary.
Yeah, he digs deep into the original Hebrew grammar of the book of Genesis to make a profound argument about the nature of matter itself.
This is where his methodology becomes so distinct.
Because he's not relying on the English translation, which often flattens the nuance of ancient languages. He focuses heavily on one incredibly specific Hebrew verb, bara.
Bara.
Right.
The text defines this word as created out of nothing.
It means bringing something into existence that had absolutely zero preceding material reality.
And the author makes a massive foundational point here.
Right.
Moses, the traditional author of Genesis, only uses the word bara 3 times in the entire creation account.
3 specific, isolated moments.
It is used for the absolute initial creation of the universe's raw energy.
Right.
It is used much later for the sudden appearance of conscious animal life.
Uh-huh.
And finally, it is used for the creation of the human spirit.
Right. And every single other act of creation in the Genesis story uses a completely different Hebrew word, asa.
And asa simply means to form, to shape, or to make out of pre-existing matter.
Think about the implications of that linguistic distinction.
It's huge.
The author is using ancient grammar to argue that God only introduces fundamentally unprecedented realities into the universe 3 times.
First, he makes matter exist where there was only a void.
Right. Second, he introduces conscious feeling life into dead matter.
And third, he introduces a divine spirit into a conscious animal.
Everything else, the shaping of galaxies, the cooling of planets, the formation of mountains, the growth of plants, is merely the architectural rearrangement of what was already brought into existence during that first bara.
It's a process of formation. not ex nihilo creation. That reframes the entire way you read the text. It means when God says, let there be a firmament, he isn't conjuring new mass, he is just organizing the primal energy.
Exactly.
But the author finds another massive linguistic Easter egg right there in the very first sentence of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Right.
He points out that in the original Hebrew, the word used for God is Elohim.
And Elohim is a plural noun.
It literally translates to gods.
But the verb attached to it, our word bara, is singular.
So you have a plural noun performing a singular action.
And for a theologian trying to fuse ancient text with Orthodox doctrine, that grammatical anomaly is a goldmine.
Oh, yeah.
The author claims this is not a typo. It is an ancient, highly coded reference to the Trinity acting as a single, unified entity.
3 distinct persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, performing one singular, indivisible act of creation.
It's like a symphony orchestra where 50 musicians play a single perfect chord.
I love that.
You have plurality in the subjects, but total singularity in the action.
He even backs this up by cross-referencing the Psalms. He notes a verse that says, "By the word of the Lord the heavens were established, and all the might of them by the spirit of his mouth."
Right.
He meticulously maps the Lord to God the Father, the Word to the Son of God, and the Spirit to the Holy Spirit.
He is arguing that the highly complex, multi-layered theology of the Trinity was hard-coded into the grammar of Genesis thousands of years before the New Testament was even a concept.
So he has established the mechanism of creation, the triune God, bringing raw material into existence out of pure nothingness.
But this immediately forces us to confront the most famous and perhaps most heavily debated metric in the entire book.
The time frame.
The time frame. How long did this take? Are we talking about 6 24-hour days?
The author gives a hard, unequivocal no to the 24-hour day theory.
Yeah, he really doesn't mince words.
And he uses pure practical logic to dismantle it. He points out the glaring chronological problem in the text itself. The sun is not created until the 4th day.
Right.
If a day is defined by the Earth completing one rotation relative to the sun, how can the first 3 days possibly be measured in 24-hour increments?
It is impossible.
There is no sun to cast a shadow on a sundial. There is no sunrise or sunset in a solar sense.
So to resolve this, he goes right back to the Hebrew text. He notes that the word Moses used for day is yom.
Yom.
Yeah, and while yom can certainly mean a literal 24-hour period, it is also frequently used in ancient Hebrew to denote an epoch, right? An incredibly long, undefined period of time.
And what I find fascinating is that the author anticipates the skeptical modern reader who might say, oh, you're just stretching the definition of the word now because modern science forced you to.
Right, you're just trying to make the Bible fit with geology.
Exactly. To counter that, the author pulls from ancient sources who lived over 1,000 years before modern geology even existed.
Which is a brilliant move.
He quotes St. Basil the Great from the 4th century and St. John of Damascus from the 8th century.
And both of these ancient thinkers argued that these days were vast, sweeping ages.
Right. They pointed to the scriptural principle that to God, one day is as 1,000 years.
They even theorized that the 7th day, the day God rested, is an epoch that we are currently living inside right now.
And that the 8th day represents the dawn of eternity.
So, by firmly establishing that yom means a massive epoch, the author performs a crucial bit of intellectual maneuvering.
He completely clears the board of the young earth constraint.
Exactly. He gives the biblical narrative the vast temporal runway it needs to perfectly align with the billions of years required by cosmological and geological science.
He is making room for deep time.
And once he has that deep time established, he dives headfirst into quantum physics.
Let's look closely at day 1.
Okay.
The very first command God gives to the dark, formless void is, let there be light.
But as we just established, there is no sun yet.
Right. The author brings up the French Enlightenment philosopher Voltaire here.
Oh, this is a great point.
He points out that for centuries, thinkers like Voltaire ruthlessly mocked the book of Genesis for this exact sequence.
I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah. They asked, how can an illiterate ancient text claim there was light before there was a star to produce it? It's scientifically absurd.
But the author turns that mockery entirely on its head. He argues that it is actually modern 20th century science that vindicates Moses and embarrasses Voltaire.
Because he points out the now obvious scientific fact that light is completely independent of the sun.
Exactly. Light is a fundamental property of the universe. You have fire, you have electricity.
To give a visual, he uses the analogy of the northern lights, the aurora borealis.
Right, that spectacular light show is the result of magnetic and electrical currents interacting with the atmosphere.
It is entirely independent of direct solar rays.
But he doesn't stop at the northern lights. This is where he drops down to the subatomic level.
He starts describing the atom,
And he doesn't describe it as a solid, dead little block of matter.
which is how early materialist philosophers viewed the world.
Right. He describes the atom as a vibrating, miniature planetary system.
He details how the nucleus acts like a tiny sun, charged positively, while the electrons act like microscopic planets charged negatively.
Whirling around that nucleus at mind-bending speeds.
He specifically cites a number: 1,000 billion revolutions a second.
He brings up Mendeleev's table of elements, noting how all the diversity of matter is just different configurations of this same vibrating architecture.
This is a profound conceptual pivot. The author is using the revelations of quantum mechanics to redefine what the ancients meant by matter.
He is arguing that solid, inert, dead matter simply does not exist.
Everything is in motion. Everything is buzzing with energy.
That's the kicker. He states that contemporary science has definitively proven that the prime basis of all matter is energy.
And what is the most visible, fundamental manifestation of that prime energy?
It's light.
So when Moses, standing in a desert 3,000 years ago, writes that the absolute first thing God summoned into the void was light.
The author frames this not as primitive poetry, but as a staggering, inexplicable piece of divine revelation.
It's an incredibly compelling framing. He is essentially arguing that the invisible laws of physics, the unknown power that prevents the positively charged protons in a nucleus from violently repelling each other, is empirical evidence of a wise creator.
Right. For this author, exploring atomic structure does not replace faith, it illuminates it.
It proves that the author of Genesis somehow had access to the fundamental blueprint of quantum reality millennia before human technology could build a microscope to verify it.
It's like viewing the book of Genesis as a highly compressed zip file of quantum mechanics.
Yes. Moses typed, "Let there be light," hit save, and 3,000 years later, particle physicists finally unzipped the file and outpoured atomic nuclei, electromagnetism, and the foundational energy of the cosmos.
That analogy perfectly captures his intent. He wants you to see the scientific method as merely the slow, laborious process of reverse engineering the miracles that Genesis outlines in a few sentences.
Okay, so we now have a universe.
We do.
It is a buzzing, energetic, subatomic soup filled with primal light.
But how do we get from a void filled with vibrating energy to a habitable, structured planet?
How do we build a world?
This brings us to the architectural structuring of the cosmos, moving into the epochs of Day 2 and Day 3.
Day 2 is dominated by the creation of what the text calls the firmament.
The scripture says God divided the waters from the waters.
Now, to a modern ear, that sounds bizarre.
Right, but the author interprets this water not as literal H2O, but as the immeasurably vast mass of primeval, liquid-like matter.
The raw nebular soup of the early universe.
He envisions this massive soup separating, contracting, and cooling into millions of distinct rotating spheres.
These become the planets, the stars, the galaxies.
And the firmament is simply the unfathomable, terrifying expanse of empty space that now exists between them.
And he brings in St. John of Damascus again for a massive historical flaw.
Oh, this is great.
He points out that back in the 8th century, John wrote a theological hymn praising God for having fixed the earth upon the void and suspended its weight.
The author is practically shouting at the reader, look, the theologians understood that the earth was a sphere suspended in the vacuum of space 1,000 years before secular astronomy caught up.
He is relentlessly building his case that theological intuition precedes scientific discovery.
So the planets are formed. Now we zoom in on our specific sphere for Day 3.
The earth is a cooling mass. The waters and the dry land separate.
The author describes this in vivid geological terms. The planetary crust is cooling and condensing.
Massive tectonic shifts are happening. Mountains are thrust upward. Massive ocean basins sink and fill with water.
The atmosphere begins to form and stratify. Deep within the crust, the intense pressure and heat are forging the inner layers of the Earth.
The precious metals, the iron core, the mineral deposits. The stage is set.
And then God commands the Earth to bring forth plant life. Grass, herbs yielding seed, fruit trees. The biosphere begins.
But wait, if we map this onto our scientific understanding, We hit a massive glaring biological wall.
We really do.
Plants require photosynthesis to survive.
Right.
Photosynthesis, by definition, requires the sun.
Uh-huh.
But according to the sequence in Genesis, the sun isn't officially formed until the next epoch, day 4.
So how can you have an entire epoch of lush, growing vegetation on a planet that doesn't have a star shining on it?
It seems like a fatal contradiction.
Right. But the author doesn't try to hand-wave this away. He runs straight at it.
To solve this biological puzzle, he digs up a very specific and frankly obscure piece of 19th century scientific research.
He cites a Russian scientist named Andrei Fominson, who was doing pioneering work in plant physiology.
Fominson was heavily involved in understanding how different wavelengths of light affected plant growth.
He conducted experiments where he grew plants in completely darkened rooms, entirely cut off from natural sunlight.
Exactly. The author highlights that Fominson was able to achieve significant, healthy developmental results in these plants using only the artificial light from a strong kerosene lantern.
He completely bypassed the sun.
And the author takes this localized laboratory experiment and scales it up to a planetary level.
He argues that the primal light from day one, that intense, localized aurora borealis-type energy pulsing through the early universe, was more than sufficient to jumpstart and sustain massive plant life on day 3.
The Earth was essentially bathed in a glowing chemical light even before the sun was fully concentrated.
And he aligns this perfectly with the paleobotanical record.
When we look at the fossils of early plant life, we aren't looking at delicate orchids or small patches of modern grass.
No, we are looking at absolute behemoths. The early ferns and mosses were the size of modern redwood trees.
Just visualize that environment for a second. You are standing on the surface of this day 3 Earth.
The ground is still volcanically active in places.
Towering above you are forests of monstrous, colossal ferns. But you look up, and there is no sun in the sky.
The entire atmosphere is just pulsing with a thick, luminous global aurora.
But here's the detail that blew my mind. The author makes a massive concession to the science of botany.
He really does.
He acknowledges that because these giant plants were growing in this strange, artificial-feeling light and lacked direct, measured, cyclical sunlight, they must have been, in his words, poor in form and color.
That is a staggering admission for a religious text to make.
Right.
He is saying that God's initial creation of plant life was essentially ugly.
It was monstrous, colorless, and poorly formed.
He is fully allowing the paleobotanical evidence of these crude, giant ferns to override the traditional Sunday school image of a perfectly manicured, vibrant Garden of Eden popping into existence on day 3.
He uses the science to discipline his theology.
Of course, he knows his critics are waiting to pounce.
Oh, yeah. He anticipates the obvious counterattack from modern paleontology.
A critic would say, hold on. If you claim there was an entire geological epoch of just giant plants before any animals existed, why do paleontologists frequently dig up animal shells or fish bones in the exact same dirt layers as these early ferns?
Doesn't the fossil record prove they lived at the same time?
To counter this, he leans heavily into geological uniformitarianism,
Which is the idea that the Earth is constantly violently reshaping itself.
He argues that the Earth's crust is not a perfectly layered cake that has sat undisturbed for millions of years.
You have earthquakes, tectonic subduction, massive floods, volcanic eruptions.
Over millennia, these forces churn and mix the geological layers.
So finding an ancient shell geographically next to an older primal fern doesn't disprove the sequence of Genesis. It just proves the Earth's surface is a chaotic blender.
Okay, so we have successfully grown a planet-spanning forest of giant, colorless, crude ferns under a glowing sky.
But why? Why would God design this specific, bizarre epoch?
It turns out this eerie, sunless greenhouse world had a very specific, vital chemical job to perform before any animal could possibly survive on the surface.
And the causal link the author makes here is nothing short of brilliant.
He sets up a masterclass in ecological narrative.
He fundamentally links the plants of day 3, the heavenly bodies of day 4, and the animals of day 5 into one flawless chain of chemical necessity.
Let's start by looking at day 4. The command is given, and the sun, the moon, and the stars are established.
But remember our deep dive into Hebrew grammar. The author violently points out that the word bara, created out of absolute nothing, is not used here.
God does not conjure the sun out of the void on day 4.
Right, because the raw energy already exists.
He argues that the primal, diffused light that had been illuminating the cosmos since day 1 was now systematically concentrated to an extreme degree.
God essentially gathers up this massive aurora and condenses it into localized fusion reactors, the sun and the stars.
He brings order to the ambient energy.
And he makes sure to specify that bodies like the moon and Jupiter do not produce their own light. They merely reflect the newly concentrated light of the sun.
The solar system as we know it clicks into place.
So the sun is finally shining its intense, direct rays down onto the Earth. And what is waiting for it?
Those massive, continent-spanning forests of giant Day 3 plants.
Why were they there? The author introduces what we can call the carbon dioxide problem.
He posits that the early atmosphere of the Earth was highly toxic.
It was choked with harmful volcanic additives and absolutely saturated with lethal amounts of carbon dioxide.
If you dropped a breathing animal onto this early Earth, it would suffocate instantly. Animal life was chemically impossible.
So how do you fix a toxic atmosphere?
You don't use magic, you use biology.
The author frames God as the ultimate terraformer.
The giant plants from Day 3 were not just scenery, they were enormous living atmospheric scrubbers.
The moment the newly formed sun on Day 4 hit them with direct, concentrated ultraviolet light, their photosynthetic processes went into absolute overdrive.
They began violently consuming the toxic carbon dioxide out of the air.
And they grew even larger, trapping all that ancient carbon inside their massive trunks and leaves.
And what happens when an entire planet's worth of giant carbon-stuffed plants die and get crushed under the Earth over millions of years?
The author excitedly points out that they become the Earth's enormous coal deposits.
Coal is literally just trapped primal carbon dioxide from the Day 3 atmosphere.
It is an incredibly elegant synthesis of disciplines.
He takes the seemingly arbitrary theological sequence plants first, then sun, then animals, and overlays it perfectly onto the modern carbon cycle and the geological formation of fossil fuels.
He is arguing that Genesis was giving us a masterclass in atmospheric terraforming all along.
The plants fundamentally had to come first, before the sun, to prepare the environment to make the air breathable for what comes next.
And what comes next is terrifying.
Because once the air is scrubbed clean, the stage is set for Day 5, the epoch of conscious life.
And here, God issues the second bara, the second act of creation out of absolute nothing.
He creates the living soul, conscious, feeling, moving creatures to fill the newly purified waters and the open air.
Because mathematically speaking, you cannot arrange dead carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms in a way that spontaneously generates consciousness.
Animal sentience is an entirely new property introduced into the physical universe, requiring a direct ex nihilo intervention by the creator.
But the text doesn't just give us a polite, generic summary of fish and birds. It goes full, unadulterated Jurassic Park.
The author is clearly giddy about paleontology.
He points out that geological stratigraphy confirms this exact sequence. He mentions the Laurentian period.
He talks about the Eozoon of Canada, which at the time he was writing was widely believed to be the oldest known fossil of a simple, single-celled organism.
He is lining the days of Genesis directly with the geological timescale. And then he starts listing the monsters.
It is fascinating how he fully embraces deep time and extinct ecosystems.
He views the fossil record of terrifying prehistoric beasts not as a challenge to Genesis, but as the ultimate vivid proof of the fifth epoch.
He writes about them with the enthusiasm of a kid in a dinosaur museum.
He describes the ichthyosaurus, a 40-foot marine predator, with the head of a dolphin and the jagged teeth of a crocodile.
He casually drops in the Heliosaurus.
He describes the plesiosaurus as this gigantic, armor-plated turtle with a 20-foot neck. And I have to pause here, because this detail is wild as 6-foot stinger.
I genuinely do not know what mid-20th century paleontological journal he was reading that suggested a plesiosaurus had a 6-foot venomous stinger.
Right. But it paints a horrifying picture of the day.
Yeah.
5 oceans.
He moves to the sky and describes the pterodactyl as a literal flying dragon with the leathery wings of a bat and a jaw full of crocodile teeth.
He concludes this section by calling all modern animals tiny midgets compared to the sheer magnificent scale of these ancient leviathans.
This is a crucial differentiator for his theology.
Many strict creationist texts from the last century view dinosaurs as inherently problematic.
They either try to argue that dinosaurs lived on the Earth at the exact same time as humans, leading to absurd logical gymnastics.
Or they argue that the fossils were planted in the ground by God to test our faith.
But this author completely rejects that insecurity.
He says no, these were the apex predators of the fifth age of creation.
They ruled a terraformed planet exactly when the Bible says they did, millions of years before humanity arrived.
But the giant reptiles eventually fade. and the narrative demands a new leap forward in complexity.
The oceans are full, the air is populated, but the dry land is waiting.
This brings us to the final, incredibly dense acts of the creation story. We're moving into day 6 and day 7.
Where the author decides to directly confront the most contentious scientific theory of the modern era.
Dive into the microscopic world of genetics.
And finally, introduce mankind.
Day 6 marks the arrival of the higher mammals. The scripture says God commanded the earth to bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth.
The author specifies we are talking about mammoths, mastodons, lions, bears, the heavy mammals.
But he draws a very sharp, very careful philosophical line here. The earth is commanded to bring them forth, but he insists that the power to produce this complex life comes strictly from God.
Not from some blind, spontaneous generation out of a puddle of warm chemical mud.
He is drawing his weapon against pure, unguided naturalism.
He quotes St. Basil the Great again, explaining that when God said, "Let the earth bring forth," it did not mean the earth inherently possessed life hidden inside its dirt.
It meant that God imparted the divine power of life to the earth at that precise moment.
The earth is the medium, but God is the spark.
And this inevitably leads to the elephant in the room, Charles Darwin.
The author has to reckon with the theory of evolution.
How does a theologian who has spent the entire book harmonizing paleontology and physics with Genesis handle the concept of species evolving?
He goes right back to the Hebrew dictionary.
He notes that Genesis says animals were created after their kind. The specific Hebrew word used here is min.
And he builds his entire defense around the definition of that word.
He argues that min has a vastly broader, more elastic definition than the strict, rigid biological taxonomy we use for species today.
He argues that the concept of min absolutely allows for a significant amount of biological adaptation.
He is perfectly comfortable with what we would call microevolution.
He says it is an indisputable, observable fact that variations happen within a kind over time.
He points to the myriad variations of roses or carnations, or the massive morphological differences between different breeds of pigeons and chickens.
All driven by changes in climate, environment, or food sources.
He is willing to concede that God might have created a relatively small number of primal animal forms on day 6 and allowed the environment to diversify them into the thousands of variations we see today.
However, he throws up a massive, impenetrable brick wall when it comes to macroevolution.
Yes, a total hard stop.
Let me try to build an analogy for how he views this.
Okay.
If the genetic code of an animal is like the operating system on a smartphone, he believes that the environment can prompt the system to download new apps, change the wallpaper, or optimize the battery.
That's microevolution. The phone adapts.
But macroevolution claims that over enough time, that smartphone can slowly evolve into a microwave oven.
And the author fundamentally rejects that.
He refuses to accept that one major foundational kind can continuously mutate across boundaries until it becomes a completely different kind.
For instance, the idea that a cold-blooded reptile could incrementally evolve the mechanics to become a warm-blooded mammal.
He claims there is zero firm basis for that transition in the scientific record.
And to anchor this firm rejection of macroevolution, he pivots from the macroscopic world of fossils down to the microscopic world of genetics.
He brings in a striking quote from a prominent scientist of his era, Cressy Morrison,
who had served as the president of the New York Academy of Sciences.
This quote from Morrison is the absolute linchpin of his final argument.
Morrison is talking about the sheer, terrifying density of information contained within human DNA.
He presents a mind-boggling statistic. He says that if you took all the microscopic genes responsible for the traits of all 5 billion people living on Earth at that time,
and gathered them together,
they would fit into a physical space smaller than a single thimble.
A thimble.
Consider the magnitude of that statement, especially given when it was written.
Before we had modern hard drives or cloud computing, the idea of data compression at that scale was almost magical.
Millions of atoms perfectly arranged within a microscopic gene dictate every physical characteristic of every human being on the planet.
Morrison argues, and the author wholeheartedly adopts this stance, that the fact that these ultramicroscopic genes contain the absolute infallible keys to all life on Earth proves there was a deliberate intention to create.
It proves foresight.
Morrison's conclusion is that such staggering, flawless complexity, packed into an impossibly tiny space, simply cannot be the result of a blind, random series of mutations over billions of years.
It mathematically requires a creative intelligence.
Now, I have to play the skeptic here.
Go for it.
I want to push back on this because this exact thimble analogy is where the modern debate between intelligent design and evolutionary biology always hits a boiling point.
Oh, for sure.
Couldn't a strict atheistic materialist look at that exact same thimble full of genes and draw the exact opposite conclusion?
Couldn't they say, look at how incredibly efficient the blind process of natural selection is?
Over billions of years, it acted as the ultimate compression algorithm, keeping the code that worked and ruthlessly discarding the code that didn't until it compacted all that data into a thimble.
How does the author bridge the massive philosophical gap between recognizing complex data and proving divine intentionality?
That is the ultimate chasm, and it requires a profound philosophical leap.
The author bridges that gap by asserting a fundamental law of information theory code requires a coder.
When he looks at the microscopic, self-replicating machinery of the cell, he doesn't see the result of a cosmic casino rolling the dice for 1 trillion years.
He sees deliberate engineering.
He is deeply invested in the idea that the deeper human science peers into the fabric of reality, whether splitting the atom or sequencing the gene, the more it points toward God, not away from him.
For him, the scientific method is merely humanity slowly unwrapping the blueprints that God drew up on the very first day.
And the crowning achievement of those blueprints is humanity.
Day 6 concludes with God creating man.
And here we get the third and final use of the incredibly rare word bara creation out of absolute nothing.
Why is humanity warrant a bara?
Because while the giant reptiles and the heavy mammals possessed conscious animal life, humanity possesses a spirit.
A capacity to apprehend the divine. A moral compass.
This is something entirely unprecedented in the physical cosmos, requiring one final injection of the divine into the material world.
We actually have 2 final images from the source material that beautifully illustrate this climax of creation.
Yes, image 2 depicts the creation of Adam and Eve. It is a highly stylized, almost dreamlike theological icon.
Adam and Eve are depicted completely naked, which is the universal symbol of their original innocence and lack of shame.
They are standing in a perfectly balanced, stylized garden featuring these small, almost mushroom-like trees.
At the very top of the frame, Christ is visible inside a small celestial sphere, looking down and offering a blessing over the scene.
In the lower panel, you see a majestic angel holding a tall staff, seemingly instructing or guiding the 2 humans.
Adam and Eve both have their hands crossed over their chests in a deep posture of reverence and humility.
It is an image of perfect, unbroken hierarchy. God to angel to innocent humanity.
And image 3 shows humanity actively taking its rightful place in that hierarchy.
Image 3 is phenomenal. It's titled Adam Names the Animals.
You see Adam casually sitting on a small grassy hill, extending his hand outward in a gesture of authority.
And gathered peacefully before him is the most bizarre utopian menagerie you can imagine.
You have a massive elephant with a curled trunk standing right next to a slithering snake.
There is a majestic lion sitting upright, alert, but calm like a golden retriever.
There are deer, exotic birds resting in the trees, a camel, what looks like a bear.
And in a glorious nod to the paleontology we discussed earlier, there is a dragon-like creature with leathery wings lurking in the background.
It's a vision of total ecological harmony. Man is depicted as the benevolent king of nature, perfectly at peace with a biosphere that has ceased its violence.
But the chronological narrative of Genesis does not end on the Friday afternoon of the 6th day.
There is one final epoch.
Day 7, the Sabbath.
The text says God rested from all his work.
But the author makes a profound foundational theological point here, echoing the exact logic he used to define the Yom epochs earlier.
He says this 7th day of rest is still ongoing.
God finished the direct, unprecedented acts of bara creation. He established the complex, self-sustaining laws of nature, and then he stepped back from direct Genesis.
But he immediately clarifies that resting does not mean God is a cosmic watchmaker who wound up the universe, tossed the key away, and abandoned it.
He argues that God maintains active, continuous care over the universe through what the text calls divine providence.
The immense gravity holding the sun together, the electrical forces spinning the electron around the nucleus, the complex transcription of DNA inside the thimble.
All of these laws of physics only continue to function second by second because God continually actively sustains them.
So let's take a deep breath and look at the sheer scale of the journey this text has taken us on today.
We started in a state of pure, bodiless intellect, witnessing a cosmic rebellion of spiritual beings that introduced the very concept of evil into reality.
We watched as a triune grammar summoned the primal, vibrating energy of the universe into a dark void.
We saw an entire planet essentially terraformed, using continent-sized, colorless ferns to scrub toxic carbon dioxide out of the sky so that 60-foot marine reptiles could swim in the oceans.
We saw the raw power of life imparted to the dirt to bring forth mammoths.
And finally, we zoomed all the way down into the microscopic, intelligently designed genetic code packed into a space smaller than a thimble.
You have to respect the staggering intellectual ambition of the author.
He is not content to let religion be a quaint moral comfort for the weekends.
He is aggressively attempting to build a completely unified theory of everything.
A massive table where Moses and Mendeleev, St. John of Damascus, and Charles Darwin's genetic data can all sit down and speak the exact same language.
It is a wild, intellectually exhausting, and utterly fascinating attempt to weave together ancient faith and modern empirical data into a single, unbreakable tapestry.
And it leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought to carry with us.
If the author is correct, and the seventh day of God's rest is an epoch that is still ongoing right now,
And the eighth day represents the dawn of eternity.
how does that radically alter our perception of human history?
It means that everything we know, from the building of the pyramids, to the Roman Empire, to the moon landing, to the device you're using to listen to this right now, is just a tiny fleeting blip occurring inside a single, ongoing cosmic afternoon.
It raises a breathtaking question. Are we, right now, currently living inside the very first week of the universe?
That is exactly the kind of thought that will keep you staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning. Are we just experiencing the long Friday afternoon of creation? Well, we want to sincerely thank you for joining us on this massive deep dive today. Keep exploring the weird edges of history. Keep asking difficult questions and keep looking for those unexpected, paradigm-shifting connections between ancient texts and our modern understanding of the universe. And the next time you hear a weather report about a coming storm, or you catch a video of the northern lights, or a doctor mentions the microscopic complexities of your genes. Wait, I can't say it like that. Just remember, the architecture holding it all together might just be infinitely more complex and deeply intentional than we ever imagined. See you next time.